Hello again. Welcome to another episode of LiveFaith, where we have conversations with at least somewhat interesting people on the topics of life and faith and whatever is going on. Really excited about the conversation we get to have today. I'm telling people, I'm using these as sort of an excuse to talk and catch up with people that I've wanted to connect with for a while. And today I get to welcome my former college roommate. We played college football together. The original owner of the esteemed Golden Crappie, Dr. Ted Sibley. He is an emergency medicine physician in St. Paul, Minnesota. Ted, it's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too, Bert. I'm glad that you have kept up with our Golden Crappie tradition and that you have not discarded that after 20 years of former roommateship.
Literally, this has sat next to my TV for almost 20 years. One of the biggest mistakes maybe in your life was marrying a woman that couldn't accept the Golden Crappie for the glory that it was.
You know, it's the gleam. It gives this gleam that just is too bright. It's a shining beacon of light in these dark times, right? I mean, that's what we need. That's the hero we deserve, really. That Golden Crappie.
Golden Crappie is the hero that we deserve. So, Ted, you've had an interesting time since we lived in a little apartment in New Brighton together. You've gotten your doctorate, started a family. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your family to begin with?
Sure. So yeah, like you mentioned, we live in St. Paul, Minnesota. My wife and I, she's also a Northwestern alumni herself. I should say that I finished my degree at the University of Minnesota and went to med school at the University of Minnesota as well. And during medical school was actually when we started our family, but we did it through adoption, what we did. And so we actually adopted our first son in 2009 during my last year of medical school. So that was kind of a interesting way of doing medical school plus starting a family, going to Colombia for a period of time for the adoption. And from there, it somewhat snowballed. We ended up having adopted 5 children. And so we have 3 Colombians and 2 Ethiopians, and we all live together in St. Paul here, but kind of an interesting mix of family. They're all boys. So we spend a lot of time wrestling and playing sports and doing physical activity together, and it's fun, but it's a pretty busy household.
I would imagine. And poor Erin, she needs to be in our prayers.
Yeah, she got herself a female cat a couple of years ago. That's her only other source for female interaction right now. But, you know, she says that she really likes it. All she's got to do is worry about making sure there's enough pizza in the house and trying to get the stains out of the jeans. Like that's really our goal as parenting right now.
So, Ted, wanted to get some of your thoughts on the current medical situation. Being in emergency medicine, I'm sure you are running into a lot of this COVID-19. What are some of your initial impressions on how the medical community is dealing with this?
You know, it's been a wild ride for the past month, I should say, and wild being like this is unforeseen for all of us, and it's not something that you don't train for this. There's no pandemic history classes that we take, and there's no program in residency that we kind of walk through to best prepare for this type of scenario. We started hearing about kind of a viral infection in China that seemed to be a problem in December and January. There was kind of rumors about this novel virus that was going to be a problem just in China. And so it wasn't anything that we really kind of worried about at the time. And we don't really follow that closely to international infectious problems, especially ones that occur in other continents. It's not something that we really kind of worry about here. We do have infectious disease specialists that will monitor those things, but on a day-to-day operations, that's not a thing that we worry about. And it started to gain steam, like I'm sure the rest of us started kind of pick up on this problem in China and rumors about what's kind of going on at the time. But it really was kind of a over there problem. It wasn't anything that we thought we had to really kind of deal with until Washington started getting infections, and we didn't really know what it actually was that we were kind of looking at. But then Washington started publishing some of the cases that they had and started sharing some of the images of the x-rays and the CAT scans and the complications that they were seeing. And that's when it really started to hit for us that this is a pretty significant disease that we know nothing about. And really started getting the gears going with the medicine throughout the rest of our country of trying to play catch up or trying to just get our minds wrapped around what is actually going on and what should we do about it. And it really drove kind of like a anxiety, fear. We don't know what's going to happen. You know, if Washington is getting inundated like this, how long before we get inundated, and what does that mean for our healthcare system and everything? So, you know, about a month ago, when the entire NBA and all the rest of the country started really locking down, we were just starting to get things going for how we're going to handle this pandemic. And as you can see, everyone's had a different approach, and we are still trying to figure out exactly what this is that we're dealing with and how we can handle this thing throughout the medical community.
You talk about uncertainty, anxiety. One of the hallmarks, I think, of leadership type educated people is this certainty that I've studied this, I know this, I've got it under control. And then this hits, whether we're talking about medical professionals, from my side of things, churches. You mentioned earlier as we were talking, we completely redid what church looked like in 5 days. What does that look like from a doctor's side?
It's amazing, amazing but scary at the same time. I mean, because we've in the medical community have prided ourselves for so long on knowledge and that we know all these things and that we can control the scenario. And I work in emergency medicine, and the saying we always kind of have there is that we have controlled chaos. It may be chaotic, it may be a trauma, someone being stabbed or shot, or could be a heart attack or stroke. And initially that's chaotic for whoever the patient is, plus the ambulance, plus the medical team. It's chaos, but it's controlled. And now we don't have that control, and we can't have that control. And we don't know exactly all the features to this virus, who it affects, why it affects one person seriously, and why it affects another person mildly. We don't know exactly how it's spread. We think we have an idea of how long it lasts in the air. But we really don't know. And we don't even know what medicine really works for either. And so we've lost control of what we thought we knew. And it's created this kind of uncertainty and uneasiness that we're still trying to develop the best protocols, the best guidelines, the best ideas of how to treat and how to manage this thing while treating the patient, but also protecting the healthcare team. And that's the area that we're really having a hard time with. Is you hear a lot about PPE and the shortage of PPE and what's required, what's not required. And the honest truth is we don't know to what level of PPE is appropriate and what level is not appropriate. We'd rather err on the side of caution and overdo it, but we don't have the supplies to do that either. And so in order to adequately treat these patients, plus the patients with heart attacks and strokes, we're really scrambling on trying to figure out how to treat them in this new era of coronavirus, but also protect ourselves as healthcare providers. And that just, it's that loss of control that drives a lot of anxiety and fear throughout healthcare in general.
So I don't know if you've exactly dealt with this like I have, but it's been interesting that I've sort of realized this week that a lot of times we talk about the situation and how people are reacting to it. And at least for me, I sometimes disconnect myself from that. This is how the church, big church, is dealing with this. How is Pastor Bart dealing with this emotionally, psychologically? How are you personally getting through your day to day, knowing your risk of exposure, knowing you've got your family at home? What are you doing to sort of strengthen yourself?
Oh man, it's it's been tough overall because it's this idea that we can't really kind of I can't not go to work, right? I mean, I can't say I'm going to stay home and not do what I'm supposed to do with my job. But also knowing that there is a risk to going to work that was not there before. There's a risk to entering a hospital or a clinical setting, just like there's a risk to going to the grocery store and the post office and those kind of things as well. But at the hospital, it's one of those things where there's that level of uncertainty. And so, I full-heartedly will disclose that there's been a lot of anxiety in my life, in Erin, my wife's life, talking about, how are we going to handle this thing as a family or as individuals, and to what level are we comfortable with me being around the family, knowing that I'm being exposed on a day-by-day basis when I go into the shifts there too. Um, so yeah, it's been hard because anxiety drives from fear, and from the fear is kind of this level of unknown as well. And so part of what I've kind of done for myself is that I've taken what I can control, or what I think I have the knowledge to do, and part of that has been training at the hospital. And so myself and a couple other doctors actually design protocols to try to treat patients with coronavirus in the proper way that we think is appropriate. And a lot of that is, the talk about putting people on ventilators. There's a lot of, we need more ventilators, we need more ventilators, we need more ICU care and ventilators. And one of the things that maybe doesn't come up in the conversation nationally is that it takes someone to put them on a ventilator. It's not like a patient walks up and gets put on a ventilator. Like we do, that's what we do. We put them on a ventilator. In order to do that, you have to basically be up at the top of the patient's head of the bed, right next to their face, and you got to put a endotracheal tube into their trachea and into their lungs and start ventilating for them. Well, during that time, it's a very high risk procedure for viral spread, and so we designed a protocol of how to do that in the most safe and efficiently way possible, and we started training on that. And so we started doing simulation models, and we have mannequins that we practice on, and start doing walkthroughs of those things so we can kind of control that. And that's what we felt like we could do in order to prepare for this thing here. But then on the other end, it's just this, we're still left with the uncertainty and the kind of fear in general and everything. And what we thought we knew is almost out the window right now. And so a lot of those kind of thoughts about those anxiety is kind of rely upon the faith that we have and the background we have with knowing that we were never really in control. Like we thought we knew all these things. We thought we could handle all these scenarios, and our control was only, temporary, or it was not real. I mean, God is in control of this scenario, and whether or not I get coronavirus or not is not up to me. It's not that I'm going to give myself coronavirus or I'm going to fight off the coronavirus. Like God is either going to allow me to have it or not allow me to have it. And that is going to be the scenario for every individual in our country and in the world. And so sometimes we really dive into, okay, we're going to do all these things and we're going to make this better. When in reality, we're like, well, I'm going to say my prayers at night and before my shift and during my shift, and hope that I'm doing the right thing, what I think. But in reality, it's God that is going to either allow me to have the coronavirus, or allow it to have technology in the medical decision making to treat these things, and it's not up to me at all. And so that's been a reality check, I guess, in a sense for us, because we're somewhat prideful in medicine. We say we know all these things and we can handle all these things, and now we can handle some stuff, but we don't know all the details that we thought we knew.
It's amazing to see how in the midst of all this, there's a lot of questions that comes up and there's a lot of uncertainty, but you can certainly see God reasserting himself and saying, listen, you thought you had all this figured out, but don't forget that I am in control despite everything.
Yeah. And, we all, and a fair amount of us that grew up in a church environment, or if you've been around church long enough, probably you've all heard the terms like, you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans for the future and all that. And that's all fun because you kind of laugh about things that you thought you would be doing your life, and then God changes your plans in general and everything. But you don't visualize that on a worldwide pandemic scale, right? That's not something that really kind of crosses your mind when you're like, okay, I'm gonna tell God my plans for the summer of 2020. And he's like, hold on, I got a Wuhan outbreak that's going to cause a coronavirus pandemic throughout the world and everything. But here we are, right? This is the reality that we're living in. And while we may think that we got all these ducks aligned, and our 401k has been doing great, and we got all these things set up, and we're just cruising along, God will show us exactly who has power and who doesn't, and it's not us. And so we have to rely upon Him, because what other choice do you have? I mean, you either are going to probably break down emotionally, break down physically, or you rely upon the person who gives you life, the person that actually allows this world to actually work, and you trust that He has the outcome already established, and He knows what's going to happen. We just got to live day by day with our faith in Him, understanding that we don't have power in this really, really chaotic time.
Yeah, that's good words. It strikes me that I'm having to fall back on that faith, not just the words that we say, like you mentioned before, we say these things and then all of a sudden, oh, they actually mean something. They're actually true. Are you seeing, are you seeing anything in the people that you're interacting day to day that don't necessarily have that faith background, that aren't necessarily believers? And are you noticing anything about how they're dealing with this?
It's I think it's a mixed bag with a lot of people in general. We don't. I guess in general, we don't tend to talk about God and faith a whole lot at the hospital, unless we're dealing with dying, and then things start to kind of come out. And so, yeah, we've had some conversations about death and afterlife that we try to not. Is an interesting thing about emergency medicine is that we're supposedly trained in the ways of, like, we can handle a cardiac arrest in one encounter, and the very next thing deal with an ankle sprain, right? We're supposed to go back and forth between those dualities of someone who is literally either on the brink of death or they have died. We're trying to resuscitate them back to life, and then we have to jump into an ankle sprain. And so we're supposed to be somewhat invulnerable to these emotions of death and life, but in reality, we're all humans here too. And so this has kind of allowed us to talk a little bit more about the kind of the overall question of, like, is there life after death, and like what happens after that. And so what's similar is that we all, Christians, non-Christians, whatever your faith background is, we all have the same fears about life and death in general. The difference just being is that as a Christian, I feel like I can ground myself in knowing that I will have an afterlife and will be in heaven. And there's still a level of uncertainty of what is afterlife with people who are non-believers, non-Christians. And it's tough to have that in the emergency department overall, because it's tough to have that conversation. But some of that has come up, and we've reached a level here where I think that vulnerability is actually an asset. We can't be the stoic people that are like, okay, cardiac arrest, okay, moving on to ankle sprain. Like we get affected by that cardiac arrest. There is some vulnerability there, and now this has allowed us to express a little more openly some aspects of our life that we wouldn't normally talk about, being faith being one of those, and the talk about afterlife. And so Christians, non-Christians, whatever faith background, we all share a similarity of anxiety, and this allows us an opening to actually discuss these higher level topics rather than just what you had for dinner last night and the usual, water cooler talk.
Yeah, we all have those same basic human philosophical questions about the meaning of life and death and fear and anxiety. The difference is, as Christians, we have answers.
Right.
We have something to fall back on. I always feel for those who don't have that, and that's why we talk so much as a church of getting out there, sharing the gospel, giving those answers to the people that light and dark. We are in the light. We have we can see, and when you're stuck in a dark room, you can't see anything. That is terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and especially we can say all those things when there's not a pandemic, when there's not a global crisis. There's not a world war going on or something like that. It can be like, okay, these are the things that we believe in, but in a sense, like, do you think about those things on a daily basis? Well, probably not. You probably just go about your life, and you just, if you're Christian, you realize that you're Christian, and that's part of your life and everything. But when you're faced with like this, we call it kind of this impending wave of coronavirus that we don't know if it's going to come, when it's going to come, what it's going to look like in general, that makes you face kind of this end of life questions head to head. And I think the best thing that we can kind of do right now is to, in a sense, realize where we have control, which is essentially nowhere. But also to be vulnerable to others and not be this stoic, life doesn't scare me, death doesn't scare me, I can do everything myself. Like, be vulnerable with other people, and that opens up channels of conversation that you'd never thought you'd had before. Even in the emergency department during a pandemic, we can still have those conversations and be open about it, because that's where I think the connections are really made, is that when you allow yourself to express some of those fears, anxieties, and your thoughts, people see that as human, and they want to relate to that kind of stuff because they feel the same thing too. And this pandemic is giving somewhat of opportunity that maybe it wasn't there before, because we didn't discuss these things as openly.
Yeah. Well, to wrap this up, normally I have given my guests a heads up on this. I didn't on you, so good luck with this. Just as a close, what is one thing or one encouragement that you would have for how people can be living out their faith in their day-to-day lives, specifically, during this time of stress and anxiety?
Man, that's a loaded question. I mean, man, gosh, like that is.
Like I said, usually I warn people. I expect more from you, Ted. So.
Think on the fly here. Welcome to emergency medicine. Of course, I'm going to say stay home, wash your hands. Those kind of things are there too. But I would say in general that. I feel as though in the medical community, we are looking very closely at everything that is going on. And by that, I mean, like, almost every day, there's new data, new information that's kind of coming out that we are really scrambling to try to put into practice. But we've also not had like this significant wave of cases like New York, Washington, and those things too. So we're using this time where we have not seen a significant surge of cases to really train and prepare and try to control what we can control. And I've seen actually great responses during our training simulations from the doctors and the physician assistants and the nurses and the pharmacists. We're all in this together, and we're trying to figure out exactly what we are supposed to do with this level of uncertainty we've never faced before. But we've really come together in the past week and a half, 2 weeks, and really created kind of protocols that we think are really beneficial to us and the patients that we'll be seeing. But along the same lines, the more I talk about this with various people, the less anxiety I have about it. And part of it is that, this is a scary time, and it's a level of fear that I've really never seen before in my professional career, which isn't that long. I'm not that old, but even throughout medicine, we've had vaccines and we've had medical treatments for a long time, and we thought we had this under control, but we really don't. And I think that the more that we talk about it, the more we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, and the more we share our beliefs and our faith with other people, Christian, non-Christian, whoever it is, the less anxiety I feel about it too. And so I would encourage anybody who is keeping social distancing, which is what you should be doing, to at least have some connections with some people and talk about, what this means and how it's affecting their life, and what are they scared of, what are they not scared of. And it's okay to be scared and have anxiety and all those feelings, anger, all that kind of stuff about this, but know that God is still in control, and that we're not going to come out of this without having him play his his hand or his role in this whole pandemic, because he's the one who's going to create the outcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Ted. We appreciate your time. I think all of us we're sort of realizing that for years we've thanked our soldiers and our police officers for their service, but we're in a time now where we're really appreciating the service of our healthcare workers. So thank you for everything that you and your coworkers in St. Paul and around the nation are doing during this time. And thank all of you for tuning in, and we hope that this is encouraging and uplifting for you, and we will see you next time on Live Faith. Ted, say goodbye.
Bye, Ted.